Hi all, thanks for joining. We are going to look at using flexible modeling for tweaking models for 3D printing. So we're going to talk about, what is flexible modeling? How does flexible modeling benefit 3D printing? And then I'll show you a demo. So flexible modeling is an add-on product to Creo Parametric that allows you to manipulate geometry. And a lot of you guys have heard the terminology direct edit. And typically when you hear that, you're taking a surface and you're moving that surface to a random dimension or something, or you're taking a hole and you're making it smaller. Other CAD systems have direct edit capabilities. What's nice about flexible modeling though is that a lot of those edits that you make also create a feature in the model tree that you can edit later. So you can add intelligence to a dumb solid. It also helps improve collaboration across your design teams and other CAD systems. So, we know that there's neutral file formats like step files and IGES files, for example, and a lot of time there's sharing of that data. And what's nice about the flexible modeling extension is that, you can import those dumb solids and like we were talking about before, you can add intelligence to those. So if there's a round feature, for example, you need to identify the radius dimension and you want to be able to manipulate that or increase the size, decrease the size, you can do that. If there's a hole feature, you need to adjust the size of the hole. You can do all that stuff with the flexible modeling extension, um, add that intelligence in. What we're going to speak to kind of is, using this tool for tweaking geometry for 3D printing. So how does it benefit 3D printing? Flexible modeling helps offset the accuracy issues and geometry discrepancies between the original parametric model and the 3D printed prototype. So we know that, the idea in, when you're using Creo, for example, is you're creating a parametric model. You're building intelligence in it. It's feature based. You have these parent-child associations, and you want to make sure that your model is built in such a way that your design intent is captured and you can go back in time and make changes and it won't blow up your model, right? So what we can do is, and those of you that have used it know about this. If not, we'll kind of show it here in the demo. But in Creo 7, they introduced multi-bodies. And what's nice about that is you can create bodies in your model tree of the extrusions that you make and different features, and you can actually create a prototype of an assembly in one part file, and the parts would be the bodies in that one part file. Then you could convert the bodies to parts. And what's nice is that when you convert a body to a part, that part file has a external copy geometry feature. So there's a link there between the parametric, multi-body part and the part created from that body, and that way we can have a part that's kind of like a dumb solid in a way that we can use to offset a surface, change the size of a hole. We can make adjustments to that one without having to modify the original model, because the last thing you want to do is spend a bunch of time creating this model in Creo, right, and then direct edit with flexible modeling, and then before you know it, your parametric model just has all these other features and offsets in it. You don't really want to mess with that model. You want to keep it the way it is. You want to create the other part with the external copy geometry in it that you can modify. And the reason why we have to modify those things is because we know that for 3D printing, there's so many variables that you have to consider, and they can also change the part. So you can have a part that's the tolerances are all locked in. It's design intent is locked in. Everything is the right size, but you go to print it on your printer and you measure it. You measure the hole size. For example, you're like, hey, this is off. And the reason why that's off is because when you're printing in different materials, temperatures. Some printers are better than others, so the quality is better, right? So just because you create a model perfectly in Creo doesn't mean that when you print it, it's going to be an exact interpretation of that, right? There's going to be changes to the model probably because of these different variables here that we're talking about. All right. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these things in Creo. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the components from this landing gear assembly inside of Creo. Okay, so I've already have some components open. I want to kind of show you the thinking behind this. So new to Creo 7, and I'm working in Creo 10 right now, they introduce bodies. So for example, this tire is this whole body. If I wanted to create another body, for example, of, like a rim or something in here, I can create that as body too. And what's cool is what you can do is you can create a part from a body. So I can right click this body here and say create part from body. Now I've already done that. So I'm going to switch to that component here. And you can see that when you create a part from a body, it gives you this external copy geometry feature, right? And if I go into this feature, you can see that the reference model is that previous tire that I just showed you, which was the WA04, okay? Now keep in mind that there is a parent-child relationship between the two models. So the parent model, if I change that, would update this model that we're seeing here. If we don't want that dependency between the two models, we can turn that off. So for example, I can say, you know what, I don't want any association between the two, and I can select this node down here and say no dependency, right? And as a result, we see as a result of the operation, the feature will no longer be dependent on the reference model. It will not be updated. This operation is not reversible. So once you do this, you can't go backwards. I'll say okay. Okay. So now essentially, this is a dumb solid, right? We don't have the feature tree listed. So this would be the same as if I were to import a step file or an IGES file, for example. Okay. So typically we would be in this modeling tab, but what I want to do is I want to go to the flexible modeling tab. All right. So the idea here is I want to print these different components of the landing gear of that plane that I showed because I want to make a scaled down prototype of that plane. All right. Now there are cases, for example, though, where we have to think about some things like thin walls and components for 3D printing, stuff like that. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to modify this tire, and let's just say here that this surface needs to be offset, for example. There are many tools in here there are a couple tools to do that. One of them is just the offset command, right? So I can take this surface right here, I can choose the offset command, and you can see that I now get my drag handle that you're accustomed to seeing, and I could take that and I can expand it. But notice though that it doesn't expand as intended, right? And that's because I need a tangency between the orange surface and the surfaces beside it. So what I'll do is I'll select these surfaces and I'll click on keep tangency. When I do that, notice it adds a tangent purple surfaces to that tire to offset it the way that it's intended to do. Okay. Now I'm actually going to go back in time here a second. I can also do a geometry search in here as well. If I select that, I can say, hey, let's search for anything with a round surface and select that and say search, right? That's a pretty powerful tool. You can just see that it recognized all the round features on this model and it searched for them, right? And I could have searched for if there were chamfers, a chamfer surface, a conical surface, toroidal. So now I can select all of these rounds, right? And I can remove them with the remove tool, like this. You might have to give it a second here. It's calculating quite a bit here, so I have to give it a moment. And this typically doesn't take that long, maybe because I'm on Teams as well, but we'll see how long this takes. If I have to do a force close on this and reopen, that's fine. We'll just have to do that. All right, guys, I think I might force close this one. Please forgive me. Sometimes these things do happen. I didn't expect this. It didn't happen to me before the presentation, but I can get quickly back to that area, so that's fine. Okay, so let's go to here and just switch to the sheet metal, and I'll kind of get back to those. So what's also nice is that you have flexible modeling for sheet metal components as well. So this is my original sheet metal component from the assembly here that I created. Okay, and what I did was I created another part from the body like I showed before. And once I have this, I can go in here and convert this part now to a sheet metal part, and I'll use that as my driving surface. And notice that the flexible modeling tab, because I converted the part to a sheet metal part, shows sheet metal specific features. All right. So the other flexible tab that we showed when it was just a normal Creo part didn't have like the edit round or the pull wall feature, the edit bend relief feature. This one does. So if you have a sheet metal part, right, and or of a part that you got like a IGES file or a step file, you can convert it to a sheet metal part. If it has the bends in it and the flanges and all that, you can edit the model. So for example, one thing that I can show here is the edit bend relief. So if I select that, or edit bend, sorry, and I select my bend in the model, right, it's going to show me and say, hey, you know, this is the size of the radius on the inside, and here's the angle that you have built in. And what I could do is I can take that wall and I can change the angle, okay? And what's nice is notice that when you add a feature or you use a feature in the flexible tool, it adds that feature to the model tree. So that edit bend feature that I just used to change the angle of that wall has now been added to the model tree. And I can go back in there and I can redefine the feature and change the angle or any of the options that I have in here. You can see I have the bend editing options. There's constant length, constant wall height, right? I can go in here though and go to edit dimension, and I can modify that, for example, from 65 to 50, or whatever dimension I choose. Okay. I can also recognize patterns, and this is true for the sheet metal flexible tab and a normal part tab. So if I go into the pattern feature to recognize my patterns, if there is a pre-existing pattern from the original creation of the model, I can select the whole, for example, and if there was a pattern there, it would recognize that pattern, and you can see it. It says, okay, there's two pattern members here that I can see, right? And what's nice about this is I can click OK, and let's just say I had to move those holes, right? I can say, okay, I want to move, and there's two different kinds of moves. There's a move where you just do like a arbitrary, you're not really moving by a dimension. You're kind of just taking these drag handles, for example, and moving it up or down. And there's also this move by dimension. So if you actually want a dimension to move by, you can do that, and then you can select like a point or something, and then you can select like a surface like to offset your move from. All right. Now, what's cool too is that if I want to, let me go in here, I can identify the previous, pattern. In this case, I wouldn't really need that. I can just, move this up and down. like that. And notice again, it adds that as a move feature in the model tree. I can go back in here, edit that dimension if I want to. I can even offset a hole feature. So for example, if this hole is too big and I need to shrink it, right? I can select that surface here, and there's also a transform modify analytics. So this tool will identify geometry in the model. In this case, it says, okay, you selected a cylindrical surface of a hole, so that means that you want to modify the radius of this hole. So it'll look at the geometry that you select, and it'll give you the dimensions to modify based on that geometry. So in this case, we're modifying a radius, and it captured that. So if I click OK, again, it added that modify analytic feature to the model tree. I can go back in here and I could change that dimension, right? So maybe if we're 3D printing, right, maybe this part expanded during the printing process or something, right? And we're like, oh, actually, you know what? We have to make that small or that hole smaller now to accommodate for the expansion of that hole when we printed it. You can always go back in here now and just change that and say, hey, let's make that, 0.48, for example, hit enter, and now that hole is smaller. So what's nice about this is, this was basically a dumb solid. It didn't have any intelligence built into it. And you can see that we're slowly building that intelligence, into that sheet metal part. So we have, the bend angle, we have the radius here as well. I could have changed that, make that larger. So we have that feature. We have the pattern as well. I can always go back here and I can change that. Say, hey, let's turn off that pattern member if I want to. All right, here's options. I can say allow edit. This option, if I select it, right, will now allow me to change the spacing of that pattern. So I can say, hey, what the spacing should be, 1.5, right? And let's also add a third pattern member. So I'll change it from 2 to 3, for example. Okay, click OK, right? So we can kind of see what we did there, and I'll kind of go back here. The reason why it didn't show up correctly is because I had this move feature. I can just get rid of that feature. Okay, and now you can see that we have our pattern there. All right, and again, I can change that spacing between those. So we're quickly, this is a very powerful tool. We're quickly, building this intelligence, into the model. Okay, and I also want to show that, the pattern isn't limited to, you can use, there's an axis pattern that you can use too, if you want to use that. It shows you, right, one pattern found, and the type is direction. If we were able to use an axis pattern, the axis wouldn't be grayed out. We can use that, and it shows you the spacing between the pattern members and the type. All right, I can even select walls and move them. So there's pull wall. I can say, hey, let's take this wall and that wall, and let's move it out a little bit. Okay. All right, so I'm actually going to switch over to the previous model and show that, the one that crashed. Okay. Thanks for your patience. Okay, back to the model. Okay, so I'm going to grab this. Let me grab this tire again. Open that up. So again, there's the original component, and I'm going to convert the body to a part. So I'm going to right-click the bodies here. Okay, so there it is. Let me minimize the checkpoint tree. Okay, great. So there's the external copy geometry feature. I'm going to remove the dependency. All right. So one thing that I also want to show is the analytic feature. So for example, I want to be able to move this groove in the tire, but I also want to move the opposite one that's on the mirrored side, right? So I don't currently have a mirror feature in here, but I can start to kind of like build that out and create a mirror so that when I translate that groove, the opposite side will also translate the same dimension. So let's take a look at that. All right, so let's go into, I'm just gonna grab that surface here, go into mirror, and I'm going to choose the right plane as well. So I have both the surface and that right plane, and I'm gonna click OK. It should be, I think I have to have similar on. Let me make sure my mirror features there. Right plane. Okay, so it picked those up, but it should pick these up too. Let me just make sure I'm grabbing it correctly. Uh, it's supposed to grab this because I've done it many times before. So that symmetry is not working, but let me pull it into here a different way. So let me go and do this. Let me create a new one. There we go. Oh. Okay, so what we'll do is, let's see if I just solidify it. I'm going to split it. And I'll just mirror it over. Let's see if it finds it now. There we go. Okay. So it doesn't always, for whatever reason, there's a little bit of a quirk there because it's supposed to just allow me to identify that mirror, but I just basically created that in here, then it recognized it in the part. So we should be good now. So it recognized that symmetry of that part. And now what I want to do is I want to move that cut feature. So I'll select that surface and I'll grab those cuts. And now what I want to do is I want to move by dimension. So I'm going to say, you know what, let's use this point, for example, and my right plane. But see, now I'm only modifying that cutout that we're seeing in orange there, right? I want the opposite one on the right side as well. So because I created that symmetry recognition feature, if I go to options now, you can see that we have propagate to pattern symmetry. So I want to propagate my selection to the other side. And to do that, I have to select the previous feature that I created like that, okay? Now it says, oh, okay, you not only want to move the cut on this side, you also want to use a symmetry analysis feature to move the opposite side as well. So now you can see that when I take this drag handle and I drag it, both sides are moving. Not just the left, but that right side as well. Okay. Let's also say that, we wanted to add, treads to this or something, for example. I can do that. I can go in here and say, hey, maybe I'll just create a projection on my top plane here. Let me change this to sketch mode. And we'll just sketch this in as an example. Select my surfaces. Direction is going to be, let's just use the normal to surface option. Then maybe I just go to the offset command. Maybe I say, hey, let's now do an offset here. And I'll project that sketch. Options, sketch. There's normal to surface, sketch straight. Let's see that here. We just try splitting that surface here now. All right, let's just do that, and let's just select that surface now and let's see, select that surface and let me expand it. And we'll trim that out. Sorry guys, just doing some surfacing here a little bit. Okay. And we'll trim that out. Nope. Let's try it now. Let's do a trim. Let's do a merge here. Let's take that quilt. Let's merge those two. All right, now let's trim it. Okay, cool. So now we have our quilt here, and I'll solidify it. Material side. Then I'll hide my quilt. Okay, so there's my feature here. And let's see what we could do in flexible modeling. Maybe I can pattern that feature. All right, so let me go back here to my bodies. That's all one body. That's one feature. So let's go to flexible. And if I select it, I can get that whole boss. Okay. Now let me make sure first that I have an axis here. So let me go into model. Let me go to axis, and I'll just create one here. Go back to flexible. Okay, so now I've got my axis in here. I might just move this up a bit. Just move it there. Okay, so I want to select that surface. Now I can get the whole boss by going to the boss's selection. There's my cuts. What I want is bosses, so I'll select that. And then I'm going to go to the flexible pattern in here. So currently right now, we have direction as a pattern type. I can change that to axis, and then select the axis. And now look, that feature that I created right on the surface of that tire is now patterned. Now we have to open this up. So I have to go to the angular extent and select that, and then change the pattern members, for example. I only have 4 here. I can change that to 24. So now we see that we get 24 pattern members on the tire, and I can click OK. And there it is. And again, this is all showing up. This pattern feature is a flexible modeling pattern feature. And again, we're basically adding intelligence to this dumb solid, right? So I can go back in here, modify that. I can turn off pattern members as well. So I can say, hey, you know what? I don't want that feature, and I want to deselect every other pattern member. For example, I can go back there and do that. I'm going to undo it. But what I wanted to show though is like, hey, we're experimenting right now. So, we're just doing this live, we're just kind of thinking about this and saying, hey, you know what, we haven't added treads to this yet. How does that work? Let's 3D print this tire without that on there and with it on, and just see the difference and to see if we can do it and what that looks like. So we're prototyping. So now I can also say, hey, you know what, let's take this pattern, right, and let's mirror it. Let's mirror it to the right side. So I can choose that right plane. First, I gotta select the surfaces and all that. And I may want to, so let's see if it gets all of it. I think I probably have to select each one. I have to go in there and grab each one of the bosses. I have to go in here and select this. It makes it pretty easy. Once you select the top surface or any surface of that feature and grab the boss's selection feature, you can then easily grab the whole boss, and then I can mirror it over like that. Okay. Now, if I want to change the height of these, again, I could go into the move using dragger, and I can say, hey, let's move every pattern member. So once you create these recognition features, you can pull them into the model like I showed before. So I can say, hey, let's now take that surface and let's offset it, but let's offset the whole pattern feature, not just that surface. Now I can move these up like that, right? Now notice it only moved that left side. So if I want the right side to modify as well, I can take that propagation move and move that up before the mirror feature. And now we get that on the right side as well. Right. And again, I can just take the modify analytic feature, and I could identify around, right, and add that to my model tree. Now I can go back in there and edit that dimension. I can say, hey, that radius shouldn't be, 0.125, should be 0.25. Just increase the size of that. We can always go back and change it, right? And again, I could propagate that, with that mirror feature as well. I may have to create another mirror feature to do that, but I can propagate it if I wanted to. All right. So let me move to a different part. So let's go back here, and I'm going to select this guy. All right. So we are creating a concept of the landing gear. We really don't need, we just need one of these. So this part has, this is all one body. It really shouldn't be that, that's not good practice to have these two in here. So maybe what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a part from body. So here's the part. Then I'm gonna go to the flexible modeling tab here. I'm gonna say, hey, you know what? I only need one of these, right? I don't want to put two of these on my build tray. I just need one. So what I can do is I can select this surface, for example, and again, I can go to my bosses and select the whole component. And then up in the top right, there's remove. All right, if I select the remove feature, it's going to get rid of that one. Now I just have the one part, and I can export this, as a step file or an OBJ file or STL file, whatever I'm using to print, I can export this. All right. I can also remove a hole, right? I can say, hey, I don't need this hole here for my print. I don't want my printer to have to build support in that area, or I want to save time, whatever the case may be. I'm going to select that feature right there. I'll select that cylindrical surface of the hole, and it'll remove the whole thing like that. Okay. There's also something else that's really neat, and it's called the geometry search. And we saw that a little bit, but let me go back and let me grab a new component here. I'll select this guy. Create a part from body. Okay, there it is. Okay, so I'm going to use the geometry search feature to find some things. So I'm going to find all the round surfaces. So I'll select round and do a search and then select them. Okay, so that selects all of them. I could remove them. I don't want to risk my computer crashing. It typically doesn't. Again, where I'm in this go-to session, so I think that may have had something to do with it. Not quite sure, but I can select all these and remove them if I wanted to. I can search for other things here. There's just the planar surfaces. So I can search for those. I can deselect the ones I don't want. So I can say, hey, I just want that planar surface, or I want that planar surface. Okay. So I can kind of just, search this whole thing. Maybe I want that one on that side. I can say, hey, let's select that surface. And then what I'm going to do is I'll say, you know what? Let me turn my datum plane display on, and I want to offset that by a dimension. And I want to select that surface, right? And that datum plane, right? So now I've got that dimension, and I could take that wall, I could bump that out like that, okay? Now again, you may have wanted to add this symmetry. So if I go back before that move, I could try to build that symmetry in. Sorry, wrong one. And maybe it'll let me do that. If I select that surface and that plane, there's my symmetry, right? So now if I go back to move one and select it, go to edit dimension, I can say, hey, you know what, let's propagate that using our symmetry. So now we're adjusting that move on both sides. All right. I also may want to adjust the size of this surface, right? So I may want to offset that. Let's see, keep tangency. And let's see if it lets me modify that. So with the Q tangency selected, this button in the top left is saying, okay, I'm going to offset that surface, but I'm going to keep the tangent, every surface that's tangent to that orange surface, I'm also going to offset that too, to make sure that it keeps the right geometry, the design intent of that geometry, but just increases or offsets that further. And again, you probably won't experience a lot of these problems. I typically don't have a problem with performance issues and stuff in here. But sometimes that happens. So let's take a look at a couple more parts and show some things. Okay, so I'll select this component now. Okay, great. So one thing that happens sometimes, like when I'm 3D printing, I have a Bamboo X1 Carbon. I also have a Creality printer at home. Is sometimes I just want to test fit for things, and I don't need all the features in a particular part. So, for example, this extrusion on the right side here, I don't really need. So what I would do is I would just say, hey, you know what, I just want to test the fit of this. I want to print this out and see if this radius works for me, and the component that fits inside of this will actually fit, right? If I just want to test the fit of this component with another one, I don't really need these other features of the model. So I can just select this, for example, and say, hey, let's remove that whole feature, right? I might not need these as well. So I can just select all of these features, right? And remove them. Now I've got this component, right, dumbed down. I removed those features, so I could print this just to test that whole size, right? So again, one thing to keep in mind is that, you know, we're not tweaking the original parametric model. So all that stuff, you know, is preserved and it's not being touched. It's all intact, and all we're doing is we're making a dumb solid from that, and we're modifying that solely for the purpose of 3D printing and testing. Okay. So let me go back and let me do that. The other thing that you can take a look at too is, you know, we can adjust like the angle of things. So for example, if I go into this move feature, I not only have these translation handles and can extend this feature out like this, for example, and make it longer, but I can rotate that feature. So I can say, hey, you know what, that angle has to change, and it'll let me know how far I can push it to change that angle. You can see if I go too far, it's not going to let me, but that's pretty powerful stuff. I can change that angle like that. I can even tilt it in this direction if I have to and move that up. Right. You might even want to add, you know, draft to a surface. So for example, I could take that surface, you know, I can move it and say, hey, you know what, I actually just want to move that surface out in that direction, for example. And you might have to pull that out a little bit, or we can do a move by dimension as well to get the exact angle that you need. But there's drafting that surface out, right? And then the same thing here. It's free move. I can come in here again, select that surface, and I could say, hey, you know what? Let's take that surface, let's actually move it out and make it thicker, that area. And then maybe select the whole thing and then move that down. So it'll try to recreate that geometry based on where you're moving it. So yeah, I hope that you guys got a gist of the feature and how it's powerful. You know, I might want to talk about this again too. Let me grab that surface. Just a reminder that, you know, if there are shapes that, you know, Creo can identify, you know, like a rounded feature, you know, maybe there's a hole or something, you know, you can grab those things and add it to your model tree. We talked about the symmetry, we showed pattern, we showed how to remove a hole or a feature. We talked about the sheet metal stuff and how the sheet metal environment has its own flexible modeling environment with its own features that are sheet metal specific. So I'm hoping that you guys saw the power of the tool for 3D printing. You know, that even though you have your parametric model, you know, you can export that parametric model as a step file and then tweak that in the flexible modeling extension, or you can convert the bodies to parts. And if you want to remove the association between them, you can do them. So the main thing is that you have a separate set of parts that aren't parametric that you can tweak for 3D printing to accommodate, you know, changes in the geometry from temperature, you know, your different printers that you're using. You know, my Bamboo printer prints at a better accuracy than my Creality printer. Not that Creality doesn't have a better printer, but the model that I have, right, gives me pretty good prints, but the Bamboo printer gives me more accurate prints. And then also we have the different filaments that we can use, right? So if I'm printing out in a rubber TPU material, right, that print result will be different than, you know, if I'm printing out in PETG or something, right? So when you're switching from the materials, and I've, you know, in my own experience, when I printed parts in different, you know, for going from, you know, one filament to the other, I typically have a change there. It doesn't necessarily fit the way that it should or something. So, you know, there is a lot of tweaking that has to happen, and that this is a great tool to do that. So if you guys have any questions, you can always, you know, feel free to send me an email. There's my email up here. We also have a great sales team that you can contact, and their email is below mine. We also have a host of videos on YouTube that you can check out, and you can always visit our website at PDSVISION.com. So yeah, again, sorry for the crashing of Creo and some of those things, but you can see how quickly it is to modify, you know, the geometry of your models and make that work for you and build intelligence into your model. Okay. Any questions? I'll open the floor now if anybody has a question to ask. Can you provide this presentation video to access later? Yep, that's not a problem. Yeah, we actually typically after the live webinar, we'll put that on our website, so we can do that. How much does flexible modeling cost? Oh, you know what? That is a great question. I don't know what it costs exactly, but I do know this. I think that the base seat of Creo, as long as it's a subscription seat, is free. So it'll come with the base seat of Creo if you purchase a subscription license. So, but I think some people, I'm not sure about the whole, you know, perpetual thing and if that's still being sold, but I think before with perpetuals though, the cost, the extension was a separate cost. When you select the move command, why doesn't the dragger triads go? Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. So, is normal to your view plane. Yeah, so if I go back to there, let me just switch back. I believe that was on the tire. So I had a pattern for those treads on the tire. And because I was modifying the height of all the pattern members, it wasn't normal to that surface. But like if I just pick another component, like this one, for example, and I select move, it is normal to that surface, right? Or if I select, you know, that this surface here, it's the same thing. It's just because I had a pattern going around and I selected one of those surfaces of the treads, you know, it said, okay, you're translating multiple pattern members. So I'm just giving you like a general direction. So that's why it wasn't the answer. Okay, well, you guys, thanks for joining. Again, feel free to reach out to myself or somebody in sales if you're interested in purchase or in getting training on this. You know, please let us know. There's a lot that you can do with it. You can even use it kind of in like in the assemblies as well. So yeah, there's a lot more applications for this. So if you want to know more about that stuff, please reach out to us. Okay, thanks a lot. Have a great day.